This is the second video in a short series on basic concepts in genetics. We're going to be constructing a pedigree. We're going to base the pedigree off of information that we have received from a proband. Proband is basically the first person in a family that displays a trait and then has it looked at to see if they can trace where they got the gene for that trait. So in this instance, XX proband exhibits the trait. So we're going to shade in that little circle. Next information that we receive is both parents of the proband exhibit the trait. So I drew a circle and a square, shaded them both in to show that they both exhibit the trait, and then you draw a straight line together to show that they are creating offspring. Proband's elder XY sibling does not exhibit the trait. So this is a square that is not shaded in. Proband's XY mate does not exhibit the trait. So again, another XY person that does not exhibit, it's a square, we don't shade it in. Proband and mate have 5 offspring. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we kind of go down the line and it tells us that only the second offspring does not exhibit, which means offspring 1, 3, 4, and 5 all exhibit the trait. There's a symbol here, it is a little upside down A, and basically the upside down V part shows that this is a set of twins. The little straight line across shows that this is from monozygotic twins, meaning that this happened from one fertilization event. Instructions we receive and the questions we're going to be answering are: 1. Construct a pedigree of the trait in this family. 2. Can you determine how this trait is inherited? Autosomal dominant or recessive, X-linked dominant or recessive, or Y-linked. The third question is, can you deduce the genotype of the proband's mate, and why or why not? So let's look at a pedigree. I have already kind of constructed this for you, and I'm going to also walk you through how I'm answering these questions. You can see here that I've started with the proband, and then I've gone up here. We've got the parents in contributed, and then we look at the elder sibling, and then we add in the mate, and then we add in the 5 children. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because of how frequently this trait is expressed, I'm going to start off with a kind of guess or assumption that this is a dominant trait. If, when we're going along, that doesn't work, we can always switch and say maybe this is recessive, and we'll see if that makes sense trying it that way. So you look at the 3 people who do not express the trait in this pedigree, and that is the proband's elder sibling, that is the proband's mate, and that is their second child. If this is a dominant trait, then all 3 of those people have to have 2 recessive alleles. So I use the alleles capital T and lower t to indicate dominant and recessive. I like those because it is clear to me when there is a capital T and when there's a lowercase t. So we've already looked at the people in this tree that do not express the trait. The next people that I look at are the parents of the proband. Both of these parents express the trait, and they have offspring that are both expressive and non-expressive, which to me solidifies that this is likely a dominant trait because 2 parents both express the trait, but the parents were both able to pass on a recessive allele each to the elder XY sibling of the proband, and that person does not display the trait. So we've looked at the parents, and now, looking at the proband, we know already, since they express the trait, and we're treating this as a dominant trait, that the proband has at least 1 dominant allele. The question is, does this person have 2 dominant alleles, or do they have a dominant and a recessive allele? Looking at their non-expressive child, the proband must have at least 1 recessive allele because they were able to pass on a recessive allele to that child. So this tells us that the proband has at least 1 of the recessive alleles, and we already know that they have at least 1 dominant allele, so the proband is heterozygous for this trait. We already answered the third question as to whether we were able to determine the genotype of the proband's mate, because we're assuming that if the proband's mate doesn't express that trait, that means that proband's mate has 2 recessive alleles and is homozygous. So it seems likely to me that this is a dominant trait because of how frequently it's expressed and because 2 expressive parents were able to have a non-expressive offspring. If it was a recessive trait, then both of the parents that expressed it would have had to have been homozygous recessive, and they wouldn't be able to have children with the dominant trait. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this is a dominant trait. Now, further, the question is this an autosomal dominant trait or is this an X-linked dominant trait? So let's look at this. could this be an X-linked dominant trait? I've redone this pedigree to explore the changes that would need to be considered if this is an X-linked dominant trait. All of the XY people in this pedigree would need to be changed to show that this is a hemizygous trait if this again is an X-linked dominant trait. So when I change the pedigree of the proband's XY parent to show that they are hemizygous, it does still work out that they would be able to produce proband as an expressive offspring that has two XX heterozygous alleles. In this instance, the XX parent of proband is the one contributing the recessive allele for this trait, and the XY parent is the one contributing the dominant allele. If I look at proband's elder sibling and I also change them to hemizygous, that also still works because they're receiving that recessive allele on the X, and that is possible. And then if we look at proband's children with their also hemizygous recessive mate, all of proband and their mate's children are possible combinations for the heterozygous XX parent to be dominant for this trait and a hemizygous recessive XY parent. So given this pedigree, it is possible that this is an X-linked dominant trait. We can't really tell whether it's X-linked dominant or autosomal dominant for sure, but it is a possibility that this is X-linked dominant that we can't rule out based on just this pedigree. The next video will start exploring our first set of terminology in genetics.